Okay, so I was just walking and had like so much to fucking say. And then was like, oh, I should probably record any of this instead of just sitting here talking to myself about it. And then, of course, as soon as I start to record, I don't even know where to begin. So, what was I just going on about? It's so, like, cathartic to just walk. It's like 100 degrees outside. It is fucking hot. I'm laying here in the shade, and it's so beautiful. And, like, the more that I do this, the more cathartic it becomes. To the point where, yeah, like, my thoughts are just free-flowing until I actively sit and try to do something, which is a great sign, for the record. That is. But yeah, I want, and like the thing is, what keeps going through my head is like, I want to talk about my life. I want to talk about my life, and I want to talk about specifically my experiences with like my family and partners, and how those things have driven me to become the person that I am today and to be doing what I am doing today. Sometimes it comes very easy, and then other times it's like, man, where do I even begin? And I feel like I have to explain all of this stuff, and it'll come in the exact right way. As I was talking to myself, I found myself like, because of my experiences, essentially like sharing people's secrets, which isn't obviously my place. It's very hard to determine what is gossip and what isn't in that way when it comes to just being honest about my experience. Because, like, okay, let's say that somebody I have a personal relationship with lies about things that they do, and those things have affected me negatively. But because they lie about it, most people don't know that about them. At what point is sharing my story just sharing my story, and at what point in my experiences and how I've been affected by them, and at what point is it calling somebody out? And that's something obviously I do struggle with. I mean, those that have done me wrong have gone on to become very nervous that I would share those things, as they try so hard to not be that way to everyone, sort of deal, or to at least not appear that way to people. And I try to differentiate between those things too. I'm well aware that like there's people who have not done me well, but there's a responsibility I also have in that relationship to have received it that way, or to have somehow triggered things in that direction where some of those people like truly would, like, yes, it was something that was within in them, but it's not something that they're actively projecting. It's something that, like, my own toxicity pulled out of them, and at that point, it's not really fair. I mean, I can talk about things, but, like, it's not fair for me to call somebody out on those things when, like, I have full responsibility in that. When it comes to sharing those experiences and sharing those stories, I want to make sure that I'm making a significant point of reflecting on my own actions and my own toxicities and my own responsibility in those things, and how, me victimizing myself through somebody else also victimized them. Most people don't want to be monsters. I don't think people even want to be monsters. Some of the most monstrous people I know, they still try to portray themselves in a way that they're not, because they want to be accepted by people. Sometimes it's just because they want to be able to continue to do what they're doing, and people would define that as evil. But I think there's still something just innately human in, like, wanting to feel connected, and I think that anybody that, like, only does that so that they can get away with stuff is somebody who is toxic, is somebody who, I don't think people are naturally that way. I think people are naturally prone to becoming that way, but I think it takes a specific genes, like specific DNA coding. I think it takes specific experiences to trigger those types of things in a person. which is a hard one, and like we're still, you know, scientifically trying to research these things and coming to new understandings. As it stands right now, at least the impression that I'm under is that something like psychopathy is something that somebody is naturally given to based on their DNA. People are just born psychopaths. But I still think that it's within the triggering of their experiences in which the actions that psychopathy takes is formed. You know, like just because somebody has psychopathy doesn't mean that they're going to kill people. But often those with psychopathy, that they, not even often, but there are people who have psychopathy that are prone to killing people based on that illness, you know, and I just think it takes a triggering. Whereas like sociopathy is something that is developed, and it's not something that's innate and then triggered. It's something that's developed over multiple triggers and a training of a response to those things. And so it's sociopathy comes from a suppression of self, where psychopathy comes almost from like a lack of self-awareness or of connection to self. Psychopaths tend to be highly intelligent, but lack empathy, which is innate in, you know, human connectivity. And if you can't connect as a individual to the grander reality, you're stunted. Like that's the issue with psychopathy and narcissistic personality disorder, or any antisocial personality disorder, because it victimizes the individual in such a way that they're convinced that that they are an island, that the world does revolve around them, that there's nothing outside of their own experience that should move them to do anything outside of only what is supportive of self. And the reason that they're being victimized by that is because no man is an island, because we are innately connected, and that is how things work. You know, if you separate a tree from the ground, the water, the air, the sun, it can't survive. And we're no different. And so even when like these highly intelligent people that have all of these reasons for being the way they are, and like on top of it we have such a narcissistic society that it validates those antisocial behaviors, and it truly keeps those that actually have those disorders trapped, and it is built in order to kind of trigger them into the most extreme behaviors, to be honest. I do believe it's something that is almost intentionally happening in order to substantiate sickness, to sustain a mental sickness or an emotional sickness, or just a disconnect, I suppose, with all humanity. As long as humanity is at all disconnected, it is easier to control. And it needs to be easy to control when the powers that be are simply an algorithm established by, sustained by, and written for control. You know, we did that. We created AI to do that. That's how we created AI, to be efficient, to be proficient, to be standardized, to be I mean, even when we try to create like the most random algorithms, in order to create what is that definition of random, we're still having to come up with something essentially definable and measurable. So that's what we're doing, you know, obviously with like the Hadron Colliders and stuff, is trying to measure and experience what isn't so definitive and isn't so limited in that way. But there's no way to go about that when you seek tangibility first, you know, because these things aren't tangible. And that's the issue, you know, with people that have antisocial personality disorders is that they seek tangibility first. They seek to know through themselves what can only be experienced through empathy. And without the capacity to empathize properly, which, again, it's a disorder. I say again because I've talked about these things to people, like, in general, but I haven't posted about it, so that's the wrong word. But any disorder simply means exactly what it means. It's something that has an order that it is not following. It's something that is out of order. Out of order means that it can be fixed. It's broken temporarily. It doesn't work the way it's supposed to work right now. But healing is always possible for anything, even if what healing ends up looking like is some sort of redirection or some sort of like recomposition, rebuilding, because sometimes that is what it is. Sometimes, like, it doesn't matter how many times you try to run your head into a wall, that isn't going to be the way to open the door. You know what I mean? Like, that isn't going to be a way to go through the wall. If there's a door, you have to open the door and go through it, you know? So sometimes change is necessary because of how far off we can be. And that has to do, again, with like the DNA we're born with, as well as the experiences that we experience that allow that DNA to be triggered the ways that it is triggered. And on top of that, then the ways that we choose to respond to that. There's always a back and forth. There's always a power. The power is never outside of ourselves. But there's moments where the perception or perspective has to come from the external in order to balance out the internal. You know, I can tell myself what's right, and I can be right. But if I'm the only one able to validate that to myself, there comes a point where I can very easily become self-deluded. You need to be able to step outside of yourself in order simply to validate, in order just to let things fall into balance. That's literally the structure of this reality. It is just innate. I mean, it took us a long time to fully understand these concepts, which is why it still takes us a long time in each of our individual processes to understand these concepts. But like, you know, we discovered a planet that goes by a lot of different names, but there is a planet that lies outside of our solar system that's orbit is like in an ellipsis to all of the others. You know, we in our solar system all rotate around the sun essentially in like a flat disc almost, right? Where it like spans out straight. That's the perception of it, at least. That's the only way we can measure it. And with that, then we have found that there's actually this planet that only comes around every like 1,300 years or so, that it comes near any of the other planets. That's how large its orbit is. But it requires that distance and the ever so often coming together in order to sustain the exact orbit that we all have around our sun. And it obviously isn't even requiring the sun the same way that we do, because the sun's fission, you know, like the sun's actual like power only goes so far. Even the light from the sun only goes so far. I imagine it probably goes out as far. I don't know the math of it, to be honest. So maybe it goes out as far as this planet. Maybe that's what it's working with. That would be something interesting to know, because I believe that everything is a metaphor for everything else. I was just thinking about how my own life has displayed that just time and time and time again, how it folds and unfolds on top of itself in just such a beautiful way. Often a frustrating way when I'm not willing to receive it with gratitude, but when I am, it's beautiful and perfect and incredible. Just incredible. Just incredible. But yeah, I mean, everything serves a purpose. Everything serves a purpose. The void itself serves a purpose, you know, positivity, negativity. That's why I don't believe innately in evil. I believe in good. I believe all things are good. I believe that's all that exists is just goodness. And that evil is a human concept used to define the separation of sentience with self. Because truly, like, and I mean, like, true, like I said, like, we are trees. We are innately connected to the world around us. We would not exist if it weren't for all of these chemicals and the way that we work with them. I mean, that's just fucking physics. So, like, it's our human capacity to become so self-aware that we become aware that we are separate, and then we stay in that, and that's where evil is. I mean, it's the same way. Okay, I recently was able to kind of acknowledge how the step processes work and how important in a step process every step is. You know, we say acknowledgement is the first step, and then we so often stop there, and it's literally just the first step. Like, you're not getting up the mountain if you stop at the bottom. But it works no differently than it does in, ancient schools of thought. There is, not just for the Masons or anything, but not just in the occult that way, but monks even, people that are Islamic. There's a process and a working out, a very specific process and a working out of action that builds faith and sense of self. And the whole point is that those external experiences are the things that cultivate the internal self. But you cannot reach, obtain, receive those external processes without first coming to cohesion of the internal. Just as you cannot know yourself without recognizing, stepping back outside of yourself and being able to recognize your place in the world, So there is always a constant duality happening. That's just the physics of the third dimension, because there is matter, there is what isn't matter, which is what defines matter by state of singularity, by the fact that matter is defined at all. Then there must be something that isn't matter in order to define what is. Hopefully that's not too deep, because that's as simple as I can make it right now. But I did it on a different video where if you draw a dot, you're not just drawing a dot, you're also defining everything on that page that isn't that dot. So there is always two things happening at once. And in the third dimension, it's all based on our receiving of those things. Our perception of those things defines our receiving of those things. But it's in the receiving of those things that the experience is validated and sustained. And so in that, and I take these concepts, I take these things and apply them as simply as I can to my very real day-to-day living. I am a sage in that way. And kind of always have been. I was raised Christian, so it was kind of taught to me to be that way to begin with. But not everybody that grew up the way I grew up tends towards these things, so it does come naturally also for me to be that way, to just like a monk, to take things in such a spiritual way and to apply everything in a spiritual way to myself. And I'm a crazy person like that. That's where my theories of these different movies and I'm an artist, that's how it works. But I can't watch a single movie without personalizing it. I don't remember what I was watching, but I was watching something with my mom once. I was telling her about a movie and she was like, stop doing that. Stop making everything so relative. And I can't even help myself. It's something that's always frustrated her. because she always told me, like, things are not, everything isn't relative. And I was like, yes, it really is. Like, it's so far beyond that. You have no idea. And of course, I'm saying that at like 14, 15, she hated that shit. And it just continued to develop. Like, that was why once I discovered quantum theory, which, you know, had been around obviously since, well, it was first initiated in the 20s and then accepted into popular science in the 70s, but it really wasn't like part of our common culture scientifically until like the 2010s, you know, when CERN started becoming more popularized, when the Hadron, I think it was actually the first time we'd been developing the Hadron Colliders. This is what's weird about it too, because I remember in the 2010s, it being like the first, like with CERN being one of the first times that we had used the Hadron Collider, that we had actually, like, we had been developing the technology, but it was the first time that we had used it. But now we live in a reality in which it was just the first time we had used Hadron Colliders that large. And apparently since the 80s, there's always been Hadron Colliders in fucking Chicago that they've been using. And there was even a movie about it starring like a Baldwin, I'm pretty sure, where the Hadron Colliders in Chicago open up a black hole and like all this crazy shit. Those are all different stories, but the reason that I took to it so much was because I already was on this path. I was already going this route, and as soon as, you know, I learned that, I was able to just, it's fun. People make fun of Kanye. I make fun of Kanye West, but there's a song that somebody made out of Kanye West quotes, and one of the lines is him saying, "Have y'all seen Wreck-It Ralph? It's in my code. I am Wreck-It Ralph." And then he just keeps saying, "It's in my code. It's in my code," which is hilarious. It is hilarious. It's, I mean, in the way that like a neurotypical person doesn't have that same type of like psychotic ability to be able to recognize that like definitive sense of self in that way. They don't like, where like a person with schizophrenia like is over analyzing that to an extreme, right? So like I lie somewhere in the middle, and I think that I think it's perfect, because it is. I mean, the thing is that like being in your code, like I truly do believe like each of us has our own DNA, and our DNA defines our physical being, and that is what we're working with in our lives. You know, we have the choice to respond to our experiences the way that we do, and we actively even have the choice to put our physical form into the opportunities and experiences that we have. But we don't generally realize that, especially because like as infants and children, we rely on our parents to do those things for us. So like when we grow up, if we don't learn for ourselves, we rely on society to just essentially become our parents in that way. And that is our own fault. That's because we aren't self-actualized. Being self-actualized means being able to know your own code, like to be able to decipher your own DNA, to actually in each and every experience, and not that I do it in each and every experience, obviously, but like what it means is to be able to, in any given experience, recognize yourself and what you're receiving out of your experience and how you're responding to it, and what your where your power is and how you can use it in order to change or align yourself with your proper experience, you know? It just means knowing yourself. And like, that's the thing that I have been just focusing on forever, but especially just today, I had been writing about it. I mean, it's literally all the time. This is all I fucking talk about now. But I had put it in a specific way today. Okay, Okay, so first I was talking about how to answer the call of opportunity, which is something that, like, that's kind of, I think everybody kind of has that question where it's like, okay, so you become self-actualized, and then what do you do? Like, if you have a calling, if you're supposed to have an innate purpose, how would you know what that is? How do you become self-actualized? How do you find what your destiny is and then fulfill that? And I asked in response, how do you do anything? Know thyself and know all things. The way is the Tao, which is divine balance. And the more that I've been practicing the Tao now since, when was that? 2016-ish? Like 2016-ish is when a friend of mine gave me the Tao Te Ching. And I had already kind of studied it, but in a broader sense. And receiving the Tao Te Ching, it's not obviously the entirety of the Tao, but it is a, what would you call that? Where you like break it all down and then try to put it in a super simple way. So it's like the essence, it's the basics of, the core of the Tao. And it's written in like handheld form. The point of it was that the Tao itself is it's not just a life, it's a school of thought, it's a lifestyle, it's an entire working out of oneself, where the Tao Te Ching is kind of like, it's essentially just like proverbs that you can use to help get you on the path, but it in of itself isn't the path. The Tao is the path. The Tao Te Ching is the way to the path. And I love that about it, but I found that even with it, I understand it fairly simply because of my experience growing up in the church and having to read the New King James Version of the Bible, the King James Version of the Bible, specifically, and kind of learned how to draw from that sort of communication, to the point that doing Shakespeare class was super easy sort of deal, where a lot of people struggle to understand poetic speech. For me, it comes naturally because I was trained with it, and the Tao Te Ching is written poetic as a form of poetic speech, but that's the point, is that it's not supposed to be direct. It's supposed to be even somewhat elusive in order to stimulate natural thought processes. And it's about the best way that you can get somebody to think for themselves, right? And that's the constant thing, where it's like, how do you get somebody to think for themselves when thinking for yourself is organic? You can't trigger somebody you cannot force somebody to think for themselves. You know what I mean? No matter how much you try, no matter how much you want to, no matter how much they even want to, but if they're not willing to actually do what it is that needs to be done to truly know themselves, it's like they want to so bad, but they keep trying to define themselves rather than be defined by themselves. They're just going to keep missing it. And so even with the Tao Te Ching, I would promote it all day, every day for anybody. I think it's brilliant. I think those that compiled it did an incredible job. It's an ancient, practice. It's something that, and then the book that I have myself was redone into English, translated by John C.H. Wu. And this is what it looks like. My friend gave this to me. Originally by Lao Tzu, but I was under the impression that that it wasn't just a single prophet. I guess maybe Lao Tzu was the one that compiled the Tao Te Ching based on the path of the Tao, which is obviously a universal concept that is practiced by many prophets, and he happened to be one that broke it down that way. And then John C.H. Wu put it into English in such an impeccable way. I can only imagine the time that it took for him to cultivate himself in such a way that the word could speak through him so perfectly, because English is not an easy language. And especially to translate something that's ancient Eastern into modern Westernism is like, that's some top quality shit, man. I gotta tell you what. But what I've noticed is that like most people can't even process the Tao at this point. Americans don't even know English well enough, really, to be honest. And I do believe that that's intentional. I do believe that that was done on purpose. It's the same thing, like, this is random, but like when I was in Baltimore, it was just pretty evident to me that that was exactly what was going on, for the fact that out of anywhere else that I've lived, and I'm pretty sure out of most places in America, it has a majority of Black people over any other race, which is rare. Obviously, for a lot of places in America, whites tend to kind of overtake everything. And when I was there, over 40% of adults over 35 were illiterate. And it was something that they were like actively working on. But I found that very sketch, you know, because it's like in a first world nation, you know, where we're supposed to be on top of everything. And, you know, since George Bush, we've been the best nation in the world. How is it possible that a city that has, you know, one of the only cities and a major city, and that has mostly Black people, is that undereducated? And it's not because of Black people. It's because of the system that was set to ensure that those people didn't have access to proper information and proper education. But you know what I found so beautiful about Baltimore was that people there don't require intellect in order to have intelligence, and that the lack of education promoted a sense of creativity. I mean, that's what's so brilliant about Black people. Their entire history has been just fraught with people trying to hold them down, and them, despite all odds, finding ways to create the most perfect creators. I truly believe there is something so perfect about I don't know if it's just Black skin or if it's like an inheritance from Africa. I assume it's more like that because I don't think it's surface level, but there is something in a certain type of person that is just, and it does tend to be like in Black history, like and that's what's so crazy, how these things split up too, because it's not even just African. Black history isn't just African either. There's people in India where colorism is extremely prominent who also share in Black history, who are not African descent, for as far as I know at least, but they still come from the same place where like Black skin has always been like discredited or like suppressed. Like I mean, it came from like, I mean, what I've learned, or what I was told, was that it comes from the fact that like those that have to work hard, that that aren't privileged and that aren't royal, you know, they have to work out in the sun, and they have to live like in non-desirable areas, and that's why they're so dark, and that's why, you know, people with dark skin have always been looked at as less privileged. But that isn't true, because in African culture, where there's very little white people, or where the white people that are being born are albinos and are then sent away, I mean, I don't know how it is now. I think things are a little better developed, but for the longest time, like, they would send albinos to South Africa just by themselves. Like, they wouldn't even accept them in the tribes because of how different they were, and because Black skin was like, the blacker the skin was, the higher sense of royalty you had, you know, that you had. So like there's something about that too. There's something in our history that has gone askew in order to change the way that those things are viewed. And I think it very well could just be as simple as that. White skin is a mutation. It wasn't natural. People were naturally brown, and white skin is a, what's it called? Like the weaker of
of the genes. It's a weak gene. It's not a strong gene. So of course those with black skin have more innate power. Of course those with pale skin are going to feel like an innate vulnerability in that, and that will trigger, you know, those to fight for a sense of control that would otherwise not even need to exist, you know? And because when white people first came around, as far as history is concerned, when white people first, there's always been white people. So apparently there's always been white people, right? But it was like a small race of white people that, you know, in a specific gene that made people white. And what they say is that, like, there were original whites, original blacks, and original Asians, and that everybody else came from a mix of those back in the ancient days of traveling when, you know, or back in Pangea, sort of deal. Obviously, we can't know everything. We can only go off of the way that we decode our DNA. Which brings me back to the decoding our DNA too, because like we do that scientifically, but we're only doing it scientifically because it's possible. And if it's possible scientifically, it's possible innately, and it's only about the tools that we use in order to measure those things and receive those things that way. And the concept of tools themselves, like, I don't know, it can all be very misleading because, like, even if that's what it took for us to find it, like, it might have taken that for us to find ourselves, but that doesn't mean that we don't have access to it naturally. It's such a weird thing, but it's like we are doing something innate in civilized society and in our sense of evolution that is completely separating us from our natural selves. And it is that concept that, like, you know, we craft tools and it gives us a leg up, and so we start, you know, using these tools in order to gain benefit over everything else. And that just creates war among the lessers, really. It's a strange thing, but they've researched that, like, even with monkeys who not recently, I guess it was probably maybe back in like 2011 or so, that maybe 2010 or something, that I heard that they were discovering monkeys, I think in Africa, I'd assume, that were from watching people for so long and watching how people have used other animals and used their tools and stuff like that. Like, they've started doing those things themselves in order to gain a leg up, and that there's monkeys that have literally trained wild dogs to do their bidding. The same way that we have come to believe that cavemen, you know, also used wolves and created wolves. Apparently dogs have been around forever, right? We just domesticated them over such a long period of time. But we've had this long-term relationship with dogs. And it's so funny to me because, like, when you see monkeys doing it, and if you believe in Darwinism, which, I mean, is a theory, but it still lends to not even just the theory of Darwinism, but like it lends to the concept of all of those things somehow being innate when you see how, like, it doesn't even matter if that's where we came from, because we see it happening right now. And there's still something we can reflect on about it because we ourselves have done that. So, like, that's where they're learning it, right? So, like, that's another concept. I guess I have long enough. I didn't finish reading this, by the way, but everything is a metaphor for everything else. We taught ourselves to be ourselves. We're teaching everything else how to become what it is, and everything else is teaching us how to be what we are, and everything just enfolds and encloses on top of itself. I've talked about this to plenty of people, but this is where I have a time-space theory that was formed through this one specific experience, and I've just really held on to it all of this time because it just continues to prove itself more and more, which is that there was one time when I was like, I don't know how old I was. I guess I had to have been
because I think I was 18 when I found out that my parents smoked pot. So I must have been like 19 or so, 18 or 19. I think I was maybe 19, and I was smoking with my mom and my brother, which we'd always, that's just how my family communed with each other. We'd all just smoke and make jokes, or mostly we just smoke and talk for hours. But sometimes we do other things, like this time where my mom and my brother and I sat and watched this documentary about European missionaries going to an untouched tribe in Brazil for the first time back in the 90s. And so something about me is that, like, okay, so I really like smoking pot, right? But I'm also like really sensitive to it. It's weird because I've continued to smoke it even though most of my friends growing up who used to be stoners have stopped because it makes them far too anxious. I'm sensitive to it in a different way, where it is a psychoactive drug, and it technically what people experience when they like get high and like things like seem really goofy to them and like kind of distorted, it's because of it being a slight hallucinogen. That is the psychoeffectiveness of it, but most people aren't so sensitive that they actively hallucinate on it. But I do, not all the time, and it's generally just because I have such an active imagination. And so when I'm in that higher state, it's very easy for me to like cycle into that imagination, sort of. So like, yeah, it just kind of heightens what exists without it. I mean, I can do this, I can hallucinate without drugs, but it makes it easy. And it also will sometimes, like if I get too high, I'll do it without trying to. And that's why I keep myself in check. Anyways, at this time, I mean, I was fine. I didn't feel like I was out of my mind or anything, but I know that I was super high because of how intensely I was like experiencing this documentary. So in the documentary, these are Europeans in the 90s, white people, blonde hair, blue eyes, essentially, pale skinned people, pale people, that are the most advanced we got. They're missionaries, but they've got science that we've been researching this untouched tribe in Brazil for the last 20 years. So they're using science in order to research them. And like it took, maybe 10 or 15 years before like we even tried to interact with them. We would always fly over and research, and we could watch them. But we never had even fully tried to interact with them. And now it's been long enough that we've been like interacting with them, but not on the ground yet. And what we want to do is meet them face to face for the first time. So we send in a group of people on a plane, a small little private jet, or like one of those little like propeller planes. And they come in and they come with like, a little bit of medicine, super basic stuff in our modern society that they want to share with these people, and a camera crew. And we've interacted with them enough that like these, this tribe is anticipating us coming down and interacting with them for the first time. I can't even imagine what it was like for them. As I'm watching it, I watch as these Europeans get off the plane, and as they I think even when the plane first lands, the tribe, you can see the tribe, they're filming, and you can see that the tribe is anxious and excited, but also somewhat terrified. They have no idea what to expect. And they kind of have they have the tribe back still in the woods, and they send their warriors forward. And you can tell that they're warriors because they're the biggest people in the tribe, and they're covered in skins and bones. They look gnarly. They look hardcore. They also have javelins with them, and all of that stuff. They have their weapons right on them and stuff. So you can tell that these are the warriors, that these are the guards, or these are the strongest of the tribe that they sent out just for protection, just to be sure that whatever they're about to interact with is okay and that it's not trying to hurt them.
And you can see that that's how they're responding. It's so crazy because, like, these giant men, you know, that are powerful, they like probably kill jaguars with their bare fucking hands, are so intimidated about this opportunity to meet. I don't think at this time they even realized that there were people. The story gets crazy. You can just tell how intimidated these people are. And, you know, the Europeans get out of the plane, and immediately the tribe, like, has a little bit of a conniption. The warriors run back to the tribe. They have a little chitty chat because they were not expecting human forms to walk out of that plane, let alone human forms that looked the way that we do, you know, the way that I do. Like, these people, like, they were like, are they people? Like, what are we looking at? And and it's cute. Like, the warriors are scared. They're like, is this, what are we doing? And you see that they have their witch doctor or their, you know, I don't know if it's like the head of the tribe or if it's the witch doctor, but by the way that they're dressed, you can tell that they have some sort of status like that, where they have like an honorary status. Kind of comes forward too with the warriors, and kind of like, you know, just determines that they're going to keep going forward just as cautiously as possible. And they let the Europeans know that they can approach. And so they do, and it takes a minute, you know, of warming up and stuff. And then first the warriors come, and as soon as they touch the people, they start freaking out. As soon as they touch them and feel that they're made out of flesh, they freak out, and they start like yelling in their language to the rest of the tribe. And then once they can see that, like, these people aren't going to hurt them, they call the rest of the tribe over, and then the whole tribe comes over and starts, like, they're just so curious and so intrigued by these Europeans. Just everything about them is just mind-boggling. You can see on these people's faces how just unbelievable this experience was. And, you know, the Europeans, like, just doing their thing, like, they're just scientists and missionaries, so, like, their whole goal is to, like, you know, integrate these people with them, essentially. So they show these people, like, well, first, the people are, the tribe is, like, so confused about these Europeans because they have textiles that the tribe has just never even conceived of. The tribe is wearing, like I said, like, skins and bones. We're, as Europeans, are wearing, like, fucking cotton khakis, button-down shirts, like, the whole get-up, glasses. All of those things, like, were just blowing them away. The dude had a pen in his pocket, and one of the warriors took it and thought it was a weapon and was, like, so scared of it. And then one of the scientists shows, like, I think it might have even been, like, the more honorary member, a lighter, and the tribe goes wild because this man has fire in his hand that he can just use at any time. He conjures it like it's nothing, like he doesn't even have to think about it, and he can conjure fire. They cannot process this type of technology. To them, this is pure magic. This is out of this world magic. This is not something that they could have ever conceived of. I mean, these people have lived essentially under the same traditions for thousands of years. They were an untouched tribe that has been living the same way for as long as we could possibly know that they've been around. So these things are just not part of their culture whatsoever, and they are all just absolutely baffled by it. And as the documentary continues, you know, they kind of integrate with them a bit. They teach them some of their language. They teach them some of their stories, show them maps, teach them that there's this whole world outside, and there's all of these different types of progressions and technologies. And I mean, these people have video cameras. You know what I mean? They came in on a fucking plane. Like, this tribe is so fucking incredible because, and I don't remember if it was in the actual documentary or if it was what my brother had told me about the documentary afterwards. But this, you know, but the way that it worked out was that, like, after that initial interaction, and I'm pretty sure it was part of like the whole thing, and you could probably find it on like the BBC or whatever, I'm pretty sure is what the documentary was on. But after these missionaries interacted with these people and left, they continued to kind of surveil them, and they reconnected with them again after a couple years in order to see and kind of gauge like how their interactions with them had affected these people. And apparently when they went back, these people had crafted like statues in their honor and were telling the next generations that other beings, like star beings, came out of the sky, these humanoid type creatures that had all of this advanced technology and all of these advanced sciences and medicines, came out of the sky and spoke a different language and taught all of their and taught the leaders all of these incredible things that they never knew. And then they were now mimicking as best as they could that society. They were using what they had at their hands in order to mimic that. This video is about to end, so I have to close this up. But that in of itself, like that's what the Egyptians and the Sumerians talk about. The ancient Tibetans, they talk about star people coming and giving us all of that information. And I watched it happen on TV. And ever since then, like, man,